No one in New York ever believed Rocco Moretti could lose. He didn't lose territory. He didn't lose wars. He didn't lose control. Men feared him because fear worked. Money followed. Blood stayed quiet. Until one night in a private, members-only club buried beneath Manhattan, a trembling waitress spilled red wine down the front of his custom-made suit. It should have ended there. With a slap. With an apology. With her disappearing forever. But when Rocco raised his hand, something felt wrong. She didn't freeze. She didn't flinch. She moved. Not like a woman afraid to be hit, but like someone who had survived being hunted. 3 minutes later, the most dangerous man on the East Coast was on one knee, gasping for air, staring up at a woman who was desperately pretending she hadn't just broken him. And in that moment, Rocco realized something terrifying. The greatest threat to his empire wasn't another mafia family. It was the quiet waitress standing in front of him, trying not to remember how easily she could kill him. Rocco Moretti despised surprises because surprises were expensive. They came wrapped in mistakes, loose ends, and blood that never fully washed out of marble floors. In his world, nothing happened by accident. Every glass lifted, every door opened, every breath taken in the obsidian had already been anticipated. Control was not a preference for Rocco, it was survival. So when the deep red liquid spread across the front of his custom charcoal suit, soaking into fabric that had cost more than most people's annual income, the room expected violence. The music dipped. Conversations died mid-sentence. Men who had ordered executions without blinking suddenly found the floor fascinating. Rocco did not explode. That was what unsettled him. The waitress stood frozen in front of him, hands clenched around an empty wine bottle, her apron oversized, her glasses thick, her shoulders drawn inward as if she were trying to fold herself into nothing. Her apology came out soft, breathy, practiced, exactly what fear was supposed to sound like. Too practiced. Rocco did not look at the stain. He looked at her. Her feet were planted too evenly, weight distributed with intention. Her breathing was controlled slow, through the nose, regulated in a way panic never allowed. And beneath the clumsy posture, there was tension. Not the brittle tension of terror, but the coiled stillness of something waiting. Interesting. Victor, drunk and eager to be entertained, laughed too loudly and reached for her wrist. She let him grab her, let him pull, let her body sway as if off balance. But Rocco saw it then, the micro-adjustment in her hips, the way her center never truly shifted. When Rocco raised his hand, it was not rage that moved him. It was curiosity. The slap was meant to humiliate, not harm. A warning delivered casually, like punctuation. She dodged, not dramatically, not obviously. Her head slipped to the side by a fraction. A motion so small, most people would have missed it. But Rocco didn't. He felt the air pass where her face had been. He felt the absence of contact. Silence fell hard. The woman immediately hunched her shoulders, eyes dropping, breath hitching as if she had flinched by accident. The performance was good, convincing. But Rocco had spent his life watching men lie while staring down gun barrels. He knew the difference between instinct and skill. A slow smile curved his mouth. It was the kind of smile that made people vanish, not quickly but completely. "You just ruined a $15,000 suit," he said calmly, "and a bottle that costs more than you make in a year." He leaned forward, invading her space, searching for fear. "Tell me how you plan to pay for that." I'll work," she said quickly. "I'll clean. I'll pay it back, please." He laughed, low and humorless. "You'd need 3 years just to cover the cleaning." He paused, then tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle he'd decided to solve. "But we can negotiate." He gestured toward the iron staircase at the back of the VIP room, its steps disappearing into shadow. 3 minutes. The ring downstairs. If you're still standing when the bell rings, the debt disappears. You walk out of here free. Her head lifted for the first time. Her eyes were not brown, as the dim lights had suggested, but green clear, sharp, and cold in a way that had nothing to do with fear. For a heartbeat, the clumsy waitress vanished. What stood in her place was something older, harder, and entirely unimpressed by him. 3 minutes, she repeated. Her voice was steady now, stripped of tremor. For the first time in years, something unfamiliar tightened in Rocco's chest. Doubt. The basement of the Obsidian was a different world. Exposed brick, concrete floors, the smell of iron and old sweat clung to the air. The ring at the center bore stains that bleach had failed to erase. This was where disputes ended without witnesses, and lessons were taught without mercy. Rocco stepped through the ropes with the easy confidence of a man who had never questioned the outcome of a fight. He rolled his shoulders, loosened his neck, and watched her remove her apron. Beneath it, she wore simple black leggings and a gray tank top, her arms lean, muscles defined not for show, but for use. She kicked off her shoes and stepped barefoot onto the canvas, her toes curled slightly, feeling the surface. A subtle smile touched her lips and vanished just as quickly. "Gloves?" she asked. "Bare knuckles," Rocco replied. "Unless you're scared." She didn't answer. She raised her hands not in a boxer's guard, but something looser, open-palmed, deceptively untrained. The bell rang. Rocco lunged. The first punch was fast and brutal, aimed at her jaw with intent to end things immediately. She ducked, stumbling backward as if panicked, crashing into the ropes. The crowd, those allowed to remain, laughed nervously. He pursued, enjoying the chase, throwing wide, heavy blows. She retreated, tripped, covered up. To anyone watching, she was barely surviving. But Rocco felt it. His punches met elbows where ribs should have been. His weight overcommitted. His balance stolen in ways he couldn't quite explain. She was reading him, measuring him, waiting. A glancing hit split her cheek. Blood welled, warm and bright. Something dark flickered behind Rocco's eyes. He wound up for a finishing strike, a haymaker loaded with ego and certainty. That was when she moved. She dropped her level, pivoted, and drove a short, precise punch into his solar plexus, not with full force, with perfect accuracy. The air exploded out of his lungs. His body betrayed him, folding as he staggered backward and dropped to one knee. The world narrowed to soundless pressure and the humiliating reality of oxygen denied. The room froze. Rocco stared up at her through watering eyes. She stood rigid, chest heaving, as if shocked by her own hand. The waitress mask snapped back into place a moment too late. "Who are you?" he rasped. She stepped away, shaking her head. "You slipped," she said softly. "I got lucky." Rocco wiped his mouth, breathing ragged, then laughed a raw, disbelieving sound. "Luck doesn't know anatomy." He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the pain. "And it doesn't look like that." Footsteps thundered above them. Shouts. The unmistakable crack of gunfire. Before Rocco could speak, she turned sharply toward the stairs, her entire posture shifting, alert and lethal. "That wasn't part of your show," she said quietly. "You have company." The first gunman appeared at the top of the stairs, weapon raised. Rocco reached for his pistol, but she was already moving. What followed lasted seconds. It changed everything. When it was over, bodies lay still. Smoke hung heavy, and the silence that returned was thick with disbelief. Rocco lowered his gun slowly, eyes locked on the woman who had just cleared his underground gym like it was muscle memory. She picked up her glasses from the floor, slid them back onto her face, and the clumsy waitress returned almost. "We need to leave," she said. This was just the opening act, Rocco knew, with a clarity that chilled him to the bone, that his life had split into before and after the moment she spilled wine on his suit. And he had the terrifying sense that letting her go would be the last mistake he ever made. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Rocco Moretti had survived ambushes, betrayals, and wars that never made the news. None of them had left him feeling like this unbalanced, unsettled, as if the ground beneath his empire had shifted by a few dangerous inches. He followed her through the smoke-filled basement without speaking, every instinct telling him that whatever came next was not a problem to be solved with brute force. The woman moved ahead of him with quiet authority, checking corners, listening to echoes, already calculating exits that no one else noticed. She did not look back to see if he was following. She assumed he would. The irony was not lost on him. Upstairs, sirens wailed in the distance, but the building remained untouched, cocooned in the illusion of privacy that money bought. Rocco's men began to regroup, shaken, confused, watching the waitress who had stopped being a waitress the moment blood hit concrete. Luca's eyes followed her with something close to reverence. Victor, pale and silent, avoided her gaze entirely. Rocco finally spoke when they reached the office overlooking the club. "You knew they were coming," he said, not accusing, simply stating a fact. "You didn't warn me." She removed the torn tank top and wrapped a clean shirt around her shoulders, hands steady despite the cut on her cheek. "I wasn't sure," she replied. "Certainty gets people killed." She met his eyes then, briefly, and something unspoken passed between them, an understanding built not on trust, but on shared survival. "Now I'm sure." Rocco studied her the way he studied markets before hostile takeovers. Patient, precise. He noticed how she chose the chair closest to the door, how she positioned herself so no one stood behind her. He noticed, too, the way her breathing finally faltered when the adrenaline began to ebb. Not fear, exhaustion. The kind that came from using skills she had sworn never to use again. "You're not leaving," he said quietly. Her jaw tightened. That wasn't part of the deal. "The deal changed," Rocco replied. "Someone tried to kill you in my house. That makes you my problem." "And you think that makes me safe?" she asked. A faint smile touching her lips. It wasn't mocking. It was tired. "Men like you don't protect people like me. You collect them." The words landed closer to the truth than he liked. Rocco leaned back, folding his hands. "Then consider this a test," he said. "Stay until dawn. If nothing happens, you disappear. I won't stop you." He paused. "If something does happen, you'll want my walls between you and whoever sent them." She hesitated, and in that pause he saw the fracture beneath her composure. Leaving meant running again. Staying meant stepping into a world she had tried to bury. Either choice came with a cost. "Until dawn," she said at last. They sat in silence as the night stretched thin. Rocco watched her from the corner of his eye, fascinated despite himself by the contradictions she carried. Violence had not hardened her into cruelty. Precision had not stripped her of restraint. When one of his men brushed too close, she flinched not away, but toward the threat, a reflex she smothered instantly. Rocco recognized the discipline. He recognized the scars it left. He poured 2 glasses of water and slid one across the desk. She took it without thanks. Their fingers brushed. The contact was brief, accidental. Yet it sent an unexpected jolt through him, something electric, disorienting. She noticed it too. Her hand stilled, then withdrew. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said softly. "Like what he asked. Like I belong here." The words settled between them, heavy and intimate. Rocco found himself wondering where she belonged, if not here, and why the thought of her leaving felt like a loss he hadn't calculated. Near dawn, a call came through. A name was mentioned, the gallows. Rocco ended the call without comment, but she had already heard enough. Her shoulders squared. The room seemed to shrink. "They found Victor," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Rocco replied, "and they'll be back." She stood, moving toward the window, staring out at a city that pretended not to know what lived beneath it. "Then your walls won't be enough," she murmured. "Not for me, not for you." Rocco rose and joined her, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough not to touch. "You saved my life," he said. "That earns you protection." She turned to him, eyes sharp, searching. "Protection is just another word for a cage." "Not if you hold the key," he said, surprising them both. For a long moment, neither spoke. The city exhaled as morning crept in. Somewhere below, the club staff cleaned away the night, erasing evidence as if it had never existed. Rocco realized then that 3 minutes in a ring had changed the trajectory of his empire more than any war. He also realized, with a dangerous clarity, that he wanted to know who she was when she wasn't fighting for her life. As the sun rose, she made her choice. She stayed. And Rocco Moretti understood that dawn had not brought safety. It had brought the beginning of something far more complicated. Something that would demand more than blood or money. Something that, for the first time, asked him to risk his control. Dawn did not bring peace. It brought clarity, and clarity was always dangerous. Rocco Moretti stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, jacket discarded, sleeves rolled, watching the city wake as if nothing beneath it had shifted. Traffic thickened, coffee carts appeared. People laughed on sidewalks that sat directly above rooms where blood had dried only hours earlier. New York was very good at forgetting. He had built his empire on that talent. Behind him, she sat quietly, her knees drawn close, a cup of untouched coffee cooling in her hands. She had slept for less than an hour, if at all. The cut on her cheek had been cleaned and bandaged, but the tension in her body remained, a low hum that never fully shut off. She was listening, always listening, to sounds Rocco could no longer hear. "You should go," he said at last, without turning. "The offer still stands." She did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than it had been all night. "If I leave now, they'll follow. They always do." She paused. "If I stay, they'll come here." Rocco turned then, meeting her gaze. "They already know where I live." A faint, humorless smile crossed her lips. "That's what worries me." The phone on his desk rang again. Luca's voice came through, tight and controlled, reporting movements, whispers, names surfacing where they should not have. One name lingered longer than the rest. The gallows. Even Rocco felt the weight of it settle in his chest. They were not a street gang or a rival family. They were a system, an idea, and ideas were harder to kill. When he ended the call, she was standing, restless now, pacing the room in slow, deliberate arcs. She stopped near the door, fingers brushing the frame as if measuring distance. "You recognize the symbol," she said quietly, not looking at him. "The night." "Yes," Rocco admitted. "Berlin. 2 years ago. A woman who broke every rule and every champion they put in front of her. Then she disappeared." He took a step closer. "They called her a myth." She closed her eyes for a brief second, as if bracing against a memory she had sworn not to touch. When she opened them, something brittle flickered through her composure. Myths are just people who survived long enough to be misunderstood. Rocco felt the urge to reach for her then, not to claim, not to control, but to anchor something slipping. He resisted. Touch would change the rules, and the rules were already unstable. "You could still leave," he said, more gently this time. "I won't stop you." She turned to face him fully. "That's not mercy. That's abandonment." Her words weren't sharp. They were honest. "You've already been marked. Because of me." The admission settled between them like a confession neither had planned to make. Rocco realized, with a chill that had nothing to do with fear, that her presence had already altered the calculus of his life. He was no longer reacting. He was choosing. "I don't abandon people," he said. "I decide who stands with me." A knock interrupted them. Luca entered, eyes flicking instinctively to her before returning to Rocco. "We found Victor," he said. "Or what's left of him." She inhaled slowly. "They're escalating." "Yes," Rocco agreed, "which means they want something." Her gaze locked onto his. "They want me." The words were simple. The consequences were not. Hours later, as night threatened to reclaim the city, the first message arrived. Not a threat, an invitation, coordinates, a deadline, no signature needed. Rocco crushed the phone in his hand. "They're testing us." She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint tremor in her fingers she hadn't bothered to hide. "They're reminding me that running has a price." He reached out then, unable to stop himself, his hand hovering just above her arm. She didn't pull away. The moment stretched, fragile and charged, until his fingers brushed her skin. Warm, real, human. Something inside him shifted, something dangerous and deeply personal. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly. She looked up at him, and for the first time since they'd met, her eyes softened not with weakness, but with recognition. "That's the problem," she replied. "I think I do." That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did he. They sat in the same room, not touching, not speaking, bound by the shared understanding that the past had found them both and would not be ignored. Outside, the city pulsed, oblivious. By morning, Rocco Moretti had made a decision that would cost him allies, territory, and eventually his throne. He would not hand her over. He would not let her disappear. And she, watching him from across the room, understood with equal certainty that staying would force her to become something she had tried very hard to leave behind. The past had learned her name, and it was coming to collect. By the third night, silence had become a language of its own. Rocco Moretti learned the rhythm of her presence without trying. The way she paused before entering a room. The habit of standing where she could see both exits. The way her shoulders loosened only when she believed she was truly alone and tightened again the moment footsteps approached. She did not belong to his world, yet she moved through it as if she had been carved by similar shadows. They did not speak about what waited beyond the walls. They did not need to. The knowledge pressed in from every side, shaping their choices, narrowing the future into something sharp and unavoidable. The invitation from the gallows remained unanswered on Rocco's desk. He had not destroyed it. That alone was a declaration. "You're still deciding," she said quietly, standing near the window as rain traced thin lines down the glass. She had changed clothes again, always practical, always prepared to run. Men like you don't hesitate unless the cost is high. Rocco looked up from the folder in his hands. "I'm deciding how much I'm willing to lose." She turned then, surprise flickering across her face before she masked it. "And what do you think the answer is?" He closed the folder without replying. Instead, he rose and walked toward her, stopping at a careful distance, close enough to feel the tension between them, far enough to keep it contained. "You don't stay for free," he said, "and you don't leave without consequences." Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "There it is. I want honesty," Rocco continued. "No aliases, no half-truths. If I'm going to shield you, I need to know what I'm shielding." She studied him for a long moment, weighing something heavy behind her eyes. When she finally spoke, it was not the confession he expected. "If I tell you everything," she said, "you won't see me the same way again." Rocco's voice was steady. "I already don't." The truth, when it came, arrived in fragments. Not a dramatic monologue, not a full accounting, but glimpses offered with careful restraint. Training that began too young. Rings without names. Orders given and obeyed because disobedience meant death. A moment when she chose not to finish a fight and learned how unforgiving that mercy could be. She did not say how many people she had killed. She did not need to. Rocco understood the weight of numbers that could never be spoken. When she finished, the room felt smaller. The rain outside intensified, as if the city itself were holding its breath. "You could turn me in," she said, her tone even. "You'd gain peace. Temporary, but real." Rocco shook his head once. "Peace built on surrender never lasts." He paused, then added, "And I don't trade people." Something shifted in her expression, an almost imperceptible crack in armor worn too long. She looked away, fingers curling at her sides. "Then you're choosing war." "Yes," he said simply. That night, the terms were set without signatures or witnesses. She would stay, not as a prisoner, not as a trophy, but as a presence Rocco acknowledged openly within his inner circle. In return, she would stop running. She would stand beside him when the gallows made their next move. It was not trust. It was alignment. And alignment, Rocco knew, was far more dangerous. Days passed in a tense equilibrium. She began to move through his world with quiet authority, correcting security measures, pointing out vulnerabilities no one else saw. His men listened, some with awe, others with fear. Rocco watched all of it with measured approval, acutely aware that power shifted fastest when no one noticed. Late one evening, as the building settled into uneasy calm, they found themselves alone in the kitchen, the formality of offices stripped away by exhaustion. She poured water. He leaned against the counter. The distance between them felt intentional now, chosen rather than imposed. "You don't look at me like they do," she said suddenly. "And how do they look at you?" Rocco asked. "Like I'm either a weapon or a threat." She met his gaze. "You look like you're trying to understand me." The admission surprised him. "Understanding is a form of control," he said. She smiled faintly. "Then be careful. It works both ways." The air between them tightened. charged with something neither had named. Rocco felt it then, the pull that had nothing to do with strategy. He resisted it instinctively, knowing how easily desire could become leverage. "I won't touch you," he said quietly. "Not unless you choose it." Her breath caught, just slightly. She nodded once. "Fair." The moment passed, leaving behind a deeper awareness of boundaries, of restraint, of the fragile line they walked. Hours later, Luca delivered new intelligence. A shipment intercepted. A message carved into metal. The gallows were no longer testing. They were closing in. Rocco dismissed his men and turned to her. "They'll come for you first," he said. "They'll want to prove I can't protect what I claim." She fastened her jacket, eyes cold and clear. "Then let them try." Rocco watched her move toward the door, toward danger she no longer fled. He realized then that whatever she had been before, whatever name the world had given her, she was no longer alone, and neither was he. The terms of staying had been agreed upon. Now came the cost. If anyone asked when she became indispensable, Rocco Moretti would never be able to give a precise answer. It happened quietly, the way dangerous truths often did. One day she was simply there walking beside him without being announced, correcting his security chief with a single look, stepping half a pace ahead of him whenever a door opened. And then one morning he realized the building felt wrong when she wasn't in the room. She never touched him unless it was necessary. A hand at his shoulder to stop him from stepping into a blind corner. Fingers at his wrist to pull him back when a window reflected too much movement. Each contact was brief, professional, controlled. Yet every time it happened, Rocco felt the aftershock long after she had withdrawn. The men noticed. They always did. Some watched her with awe, others with resentment. She was not part of the family, yet she moved through their hierarchy as if it had been built around her. Rocco allowed it. More than that, he relied on it. He trusted her instincts even when they contradicted his own, and that trust unsettled him more than any external threat. At night, when meetings ended and the city dulled into distant noise, they spoke in fragments, never about love, never about the future, only about things that slipped through the cracks when vigilance faltered. Music she no longer listened to, cities he refused to visit, the strange loneliness of power and the quieter loneliness of survival. Sometimes they shared silence instead, sitting across from one another as if words might undo something fragile forming between them. Rocco told himself it was necessity, proximity, stress. He was lying. The first real test came without warning. A fundraiser, public, loud, impossible to secure completely. Rocco had avoided these appearances for years, but the gallows had made it clear that absence would be interpreted as weakness. He agreed to attend knowing it was a trap of perception, not bullets. She disagreed. "They want visibility," she said, adjusting her jacket as they watched the venue from a distance. "They want to see if you blink." "I won't," Rocco replied. Her gaze flicked to him. Sharp. "That's not what worries me. Inside, the lights were too bright, the smiles too rehearsed." Rocco moved through the crowd with practiced ease, shaking hands, trading pleasantries that meant nothing. She stayed close, always in his periphery, eyes scanning reflections, exits, patterns. To anyone watching, she was another member of his security detail. To Rocco, she was the only thing anchoring him to reality. Halfway through the evening, a glass shattered, not a gunshot, just noise, enough to shift attention, enough to mask movement. She was on him instantly, her body angled protectively, breath steady near his ear. "Don't turn," she murmured. 3:00. Rocco trusted her without question. He kept smiling while she guided him away, her hand firm at his back. The threat never materialized. That was the point. The message, however, was clear. Later, alone in the car, the silence between them vibrated. "They're getting closer," she said. "Yes," Rocco replied. "And you're staying closer to me?" She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something complicated crossed her face. "That's the problem." He frowned. "Explain." She hesitated. "A rare thing. The longer I stay," she said carefully, "the harder it becomes for them to hurt you without going through me. She met his eyes. And I won't survive that forever. The admission landed heavier than any threat the gallows had issued. Rocco leaned back, exhaling slowly. You're not expendable. Her lips pressed into a thin line. People like me always are. That's how we're made. The drive back was quiet. When they reached the building, she stopped him before he entered, her hand catching his sleeve. The gesture was instinctive, protective, intimate in a way neither of them acknowledged. You don't belong in this war, she said softly. Rocco looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Neither do you. That night, the building was breached, not violently, not yet. A message slipped past every firewall, every human precaution. It appeared on Rocco's private screen without warning. A single line of text. Choose, no explanation, no demands, just the word. She read it over his shoulder, her expression closing. They're forcing a decision, she said. Me or your empire. Rocco did not answer immediately. He shut the screen down, stood and walked to the window. The city stretched endlessly below, full of people who would never know his name, never care about the wars fought in their shadow. I've spent my life choosing power, he said at last. It's cost me everything else. She stepped closer, her presence a quiet gravity. And now Rocco turned to her, searching her face for fear, for expectation. He found neither. Only resolve. Now, he said, I choose what I can't replace. The words hung between them, unguarded. She inhaled sharply, then looked away, as if the truth were too close to touch. You can't protect me forever, she said. I know, Rocco replied, but I can try. For the first time since they had met. She did not argue. She rested her forehead briefly against the glass, eyes closed, as if allowing herself a single moment of rest. Rocco watched her, aware that whatever this was, whatever had begun between them, it had already crossed into territory. Neither of them could retreat from. Outside, the city pulsed on, indifferent. Inside, a choice had been made that would echo far beyond the walls of his empire. And somewhere in the dark, the gallows smiled, knowing the bodyguard who was never meant to stay had become the only thing standing between a king and his fall. The city changed when she vanished. Rocco Moretti noticed it in the smallest things. First, the way corridors echoed too loudly, the way doors seemed to open a second slower than they should. He noticed it in himself, too. His hand reached instinctively for a presence that was no longer at his side. His gaze searched corners she used to claim before he ever saw them. By morning, her absence had become undeniable. Her room was untouched. No signs of a struggle, no blood, no hurried packing. The bed was neatly made, the single bag she carried everywhere gone. On the table lay her glasses, folded with deliberate care, placed where he would find them. Rocco stared at them for a long time, a cold weight settling in his chest. She left, Luca said carefully. Standing at the door, we checked every camera. She avoided them all. Of course she did. The thought cut sharper than anger. She had not been taken. She had chosen this. Rocco's jaw tightened. Lock the building down, he said. I want every street, every harbor, every exit watched. No one leaves this city without me knowing. Luca hesitated. Boss, if she wanted to disappear, she doesn't get to decide that alone. Rocco snapped, the words harsher than intended. But as the hours dragged on, certainty began to erode. There were no demands, no threats. The gallows, so vocal before, had gone silent. Silence was never absence. It was preparation. By nightfall, the first body was found. A woman, pulled from the river near the docks. Same height, same build, dark hair plastered to her face. The news reached Rocco before the coroner finished his report. He arrived without an escort, ignoring protests, his mind narrowing to a single brutal point. They lifted the sheet. For one endless second, the world tilted. Then he saw it. The scar was wrong. The hands too smooth. The face altered just enough to fool a careless eye. A decoy. Deliberate. Cruel. Rocco exhaled shakily, fury burning hot beneath the relief. She was alive, but she wanted him to believe she wasn't. They're sending a message, Luca said grimly. They want you destabilized. No, Rocco replied, eyes locked on the body. She's sending a message. He understood it now. Staying had made him vulnerable. Loving no, wanting him had made her dangerous to everyone involved. So she had done what she did best. She had removed herself from the board. The realization tasted like betrayal, even as he recognized the twisted mercy behind it. 2 nights later, the attack came. Not at the compound. Not where he expected. A shipment intercepted. One of his oldest allies executed publicly. The gallows signature carved into steel. They were punishing him for choosing wrong. Rocco retaliated without hesitation. Territory burned. Names vanished. Blood flowed through channels he had sworn to keep clean. Still, the silence from her remained absolute. Until a single encrypted message appeared on a device only he knew existed. Stop looking. That was all. Rocco crushed the phone in his hand, breath coming hard. She's alive, he said to no one. And she thinks this will end if I let her go. The following days blurred into a fevered rhythm of violence and restraint. Every instinct screamed at him to pull back, to fortify, to protect what remained. But protection had never been his problem. Control was, and he had lost it. Then came the second body. This one was real. A man from the gallows, delivered to his doorstep with surgical precision. Inside his jacket pocket was a familiar object, a ring Rocco had seen her wear once, absent-mindedly twisting when she was thinking too hard. She was close. That night, Rocco stood alone in his office, the city sprawled beneath him, and finally admitted the truth he had been avoiding. He could burn the organization to the ground. He could win the war. But he would lose her anyway. And somehow, that loss felt heavier than anything he had ever sacrificed. She watched from across the street, hidden in the anonymity she had mastered long before she met him. The building glowed like a fortress, a beacon she refused to approach. Her chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with wounds or exhaustion. Leaving had been necessary. Staying would have destroyed him. She had learned long ago that people like her were storms. They did not build homes. They passed through, leaving survival in their wake. Still, as she turned away, she allowed herself one final glance upward, toward the window she knew he favored. For a heartbeat, she imagined him there, looking out, feeling the same quiet devastation. She pressed a hand to her ribs, steadying herself. "This is how it ends," she whispered, though no one was listening. But fate, she had learned, never respected clean endings. As dawn approached, Rocco Moretti made a decision as reckless as it was inevitable. He would stop playing defense. He would stop reacting. If she had removed herself to save him, he would tear down the world hunting her to bring her back. Not as a possession, not as a shield, but as the one thing he refused to lose. And somewhere in the shadows, she felt it, the shift, the tremor of an approaching storm she knew too well. The night she disappeared was over. The consequences were just beginning. By the time Rocco Moretti stopped pretending this was a war he could win cleanly, the city had already chosen its side. It whispered his name differently now, not with fear, but with anticipation. Fires burned where his influence once stood unchallenged. Old allies hesitated before answering his calls. Enemies who had stayed buried sensed opportunity and began to crawl toward the surface. The gallows had done exactly what they intended, unbalanced him, exposed him, forced emotion into a world that respected only leverage. And still, she did not return. Rocco tracked the pattern she left behind the way he once tracked rivals. The dead man with the ring, the misdirected shipments, the sudden collapse of one gallows cell followed by silence from another. It was not chaos. It was choreography. She was moving, striking just enough to keep the pressure off him without drawing too much attention to herself. She was protecting him. The realization hit harder than betrayal ever could. Rocco stood in the war room surrounded by men who waited for orders, maps glowing red with threats. He dismissed them all with a wave of his hand, locking the door behind them. Alone, he let the truth surface. She had not disappeared because she didn't care. She had disappeared because she cared too much. That was the lie she was living with. Across the city, she stood in a half-abandoned apartment overlooking the river, watching the lights flicker on as night claimed its territory. Her shoulder ached where a bullet had grazed her 2 days earlier. She had stitched it herself, hands steady, jaw clenched. Pain was familiar. Attachment was not. She replayed the moment she left over and over again, the careful placement of her glasses, the absence designed to look like surrender. She had told herself it was necessary, that removing herself from Rocco's world was the only way to keep him alive. What she had not prepared for was how empty survival felt without him. Her burner phone vibrated once. A single message. No number, no name. "I know what you're doing." Her breath caught. For a brief, dangerous moment, she considered replying. Then she deleted the message and shut the phone off entirely. Contact would unravel everything. Rocco would come for her, and if he did, the gallows would follow. She could not allow that. The next move had to be decisive. Final. Rocco's response came sooner than she expected. The public execution of one of his own men was meant to provoke him. The gallows staged it perfectly broad daylight. Witnesses. The symbol carved deep and visible. It was a dare. Rocco answered with a lie. He leaked information through channels he knew were compromised. A meeting. A deal. An exchange. He made it look like desperation. Like weakness. Like a man willing to sacrifice anything to stabilize his empire. Including her. The news reached her within hours. She stood frozen in the middle of a crowded street, the world blurring around her as the words repeated in her mind. Rocco had offered her up. Location, time, terms, for a heartbeat. Everything inside her broke. Then the training returned. The instinct. The understanding that Rocco Moretti did not make mistakes like this. It was a trap. And it was meant for her as much as it was meant for them. She went anyway. The warehouse was quiet. Too quiet. She entered from above, dropping soundlessly onto the steel beams, eyes scanning, heart steady. She saw them first, 3 gallows operatives, weapons ready, confidence etched into their posture. They believed the lie. They believed she had been sold. She moved before they realized the truth. The fight was fast and brutal, over in less than a minute. When it ended, she stood among bodies that would never speak again, chest rising and falling in controlled breaths. She almost missed him. Almost. Rocco stepped out of the shadows, unarmed, his presence heavy and unmistakable. For a moment, neither of them moved. The space between them vibrated with everything left unsaid. "You used me as bait," she said finally, her voice even. "Yes," Rocco replied. "And you walked into it anyway." Her gaze searched his face, looking for guilt, for regret. She found neither. She found something worse. Understanding. "You shouldn't have come," she said. "I didn't," he answered. "You did?" The truth landed softly and shattered all the same. This was not a reunion. This was a reckoning. "They won't stop," she said. "Not because of you, because of me." Rocco took a step closer. "Then we end it." "You can't," she insisted. "Not without losing everything." "I already have," he said quietly. "Except you." The words stripped the air from her lungs. She turned away, fighting the pull, the need to believe him. "This doesn't end well," she whispered. "No," Rocco agreed. "But it ends honestly." Sirens wailed in the distance. The window for escape narrowed. She knew she had seconds to decide. She faced him once more, eyes sharp, resolute. "If we do this," she said, "there's no going back." Rocco met her gaze without hesitation. "I'm not interested in going back." They left together, not as king and weapon, not as protector and protected, but as 2 people standing in the open at last, fully aware of what it would cost. Behind them, the lie that saved them both burned itself out. Ahead lay the truth, and it would demand blood. They did not go back to Rocco's compound. That was the first rule, she said, and Rocco did not argue. The city was too loud there, too watched, too familiar. The gallows thrived on predictability. If they wanted to finish this, they had to disappear before striking. So they moved through New York like ghosts, slipping between breaths, changing cars, routes, identities, until even Rocco felt the unsettling freedom of being unrecognizable. They took refuge in a forgotten building near the river, a place Rocco once used to bury records he no longer wanted traced back to him. It was bare, cold, stripped of luxury. For the first time since she entered his life, There were no guards outside the door, no men waiting for orders, just the two of them and the truth neither could avoid any longer. She cleaned her weapon methodically, movements precise but slower than usual. Fatigue weighed on her now, not physical, but bone deep. Rocco watched from across the room, his jacket draped over a chair, his posture unguarded in a way no one else had ever been allowed to see. "This ends tonight," she said finally. Rocco nodded. "Yes, you need to understand something," she continued, eyes fixed on the steel in her hands. "The gallows didn't create me. They found me." She paused, then added, "And they won't stop because you threaten them. They'll stop only when they believe I'm gone." Rocco felt the implication tighten around his chest. "You're not talking about dying." "No," she replied softly. "I'm talking about disappearing for real." The silence that followed was heavy, intimate, dangerous. Rocco crossed the room before he realized he was moving. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she had to look up at him. "You already tried that," he said. "It almost destroyed us both." She met his gaze without flinching. "This time is different." "How?" His voice was low, controlled, but the edge beneath it was unmistakable. "Because this time," she said, "you won't chase me?" The words cut deeper than any threat the gallows had ever made. Rocco turned away, dragging a hand through his hair, forcing himself to think like the man he used to be. Strategist, king, survivor. Not the man standing in an empty room afraid of losing one person. "They want you erased," he said. "Then we erase the organization." She shook her head. "You can burn their leadership, their money, their cells, but the idea survives. As long as they think I exist, they'll keep hunting." Her voice softened. "And as long as they hunt me, they'll use you to draw me out." Rocco understood then what this really was. Not sacrifice, control. She was choosing the only outcome where he lived. "I won't agree to this," he said. "You don't have to," she replied. "You just have to let it happen." Before he could respond, his phone vibrated. One message. One location, no words. The gallows were done waiting. They moved together, no more arguments, no more lies. The abandoned terminal on the outskirts of the city was exactly what it looked like, open, exposed, impossible to secure. Floodlights snapped on as they arrived, illuminating figures emerging from the shadows. Weapons lowered, but ready. This was not an ambush. It was a ceremony. Rocco stepped forward first. "You wanted an end," he said calmly. "Here it is." The leader of the gallows smiled beneath his hood. "We wanted her," he replied. "But you'll do, too." She moved then, fast and deliberate, placing herself between Rocco and the guns aimed his way. The message was unmistakable. Rocco felt something fracture inside him, something that had nothing to do with power or pride. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "For her alone." She glanced back at him, and for the first time since they met, her expression was unguarded, tender, almost sad. "I already did," she whispered. What followed was chaos, but not the kind born of surprise. It was controlled, brutal, final. She moved through the gallows with the precision of someone closing a chapter she had memorized by heart. Rocco fought beside her, no longer shielding, no longer commanding, simply refusing to let her stand alone. When it ended, the terminal was silent, except for their breathing. The leader lay at her feet, life fading fast. He laughed weakly. "You think this ends you?" he rasped. "You're a legend. Legends don't disappear." She knelt beside him, voice calm. "They do," she said. "When no one is left to tell the story." The shot was clean. Afterward, there was no triumph, no relief, only the heavy certainty that the world they had known was gone. They stood together as sirens approached, the city closing in. She pressed something into Rocco's hand, a flash drive. "Everything they have," she said. "Accounts, names, roots. Use it to protect what's left." "And you?" Rocco asked. She stepped back. One step. Then another. "This is where we separate," she said softly. "They'll believe I died here tonight. You'll make sure of it." Rocco felt his chest tighten. breath catching despite himself. You think I can just let you go? She smiled faintly. I know you can. That's why I'm still alive. For a moment, it seemed she might stay. Then she turned and vanished into the darkness, moving the way she always had without hesitation, without looking back. Rocco remained where he was as the authorities arrived, standing among ruins that marked the end of an era. The gallows were gone. His empire was wounded but intact. Yet the victory felt hollow, because the truth that ended the war had cost him the one thing he could not rebuild. And as dawn broke over the terminal, Rocco Moretti understood that some endings were not meant to feel like salvation. They were meant to hurt and be survived. Rocco Moretti learned, in the months that followed, that survival was not the same as living. The city adjusted to the fall of the gallows with unsettling speed. Accounts froze. Routes collapsed. Names vanished from conversations that once carried weight. On paper, Rocco had won. His empire stabilized into something quieter, leaner, less visible. He let parts of it go without a fight, territories that demanded constant blood, alliances that required cruelty to sustain. Power, he discovered, was lighter when it was no longer built on fear alone. None of it filled the space she left behind. Her disappearance was convincing. Bodies had been counted, evidence planted. Even those who doubted chose not to ask questions. Legends died when enough people agreed to bury them. Rocco ensured the story held. He paid for silence. He rewarded distance. He never spoke her name. At night, however, the silence became unbearable. He slept in rooms that felt too large, too empty. His hand still reached for a presence that no longer existed, fingers curling against cold sheets. Sometimes he caught himself listening for footsteps that would never come, for the subtle pause before entering a room, for the breath he used to feel beside him in the dark. Guilt settled into him slowly, like a bruise blooming beneath the skin. He had let her go. Worse, he had helped her disappear. He told himself it was love. He told himself it was respect. Some nights, it felt like cowardice dressed up as mercy. He stopped attending public events, stopped pretending his attention was fully on the future. The flash drive she had given him remained locked in a private safe, untouched. He had used enough of it to dismantle the gallows completely, then sealed the rest away. There were some doors he refused to open again. Across the ocean, she learned to breathe differently. The new city was smaller, slower. It did not know her history or care to learn it. She worked under another name, in another life, performing tasks that did not require violence or vigilance. Her hands, once instruments of precision and death, now bore ink stains, paper cuts, small ordinary injuries that healed without consequence. Freedom, she discovered, was disorienting. At first, she slept lightly, waking at every sound. Old habits died slowly. She mapped exits without meaning to, counted steps, measured rooms. But gradually, the tension eased. The world stopped feeling like a trap waiting to close. What did not ease was the ache. She avoided mirrors, avoided anything that reminded her of the woman she had been when she stood beside Rocco Moretti, because remembering him meant remembering the life she had chosen not to have. She told herself he was safer without her, that loving him from a distance was the only way to love him at all. Some nights, she failed at convincing herself. She followed the news more than she admitted, read between lines written carefully by journalists who knew better than to speculate. She saw the changes in him even through the ink and distanced the softened edges, the quieter presence, the man stepping out of his own shadow. He was becoming someone else. So was she. The letter arrived without warning. No return address, no signature, just a single page, folded once. She recognized his handwriting instantly, the restraint in it, the precision. I kept my word. You are gone to the world. Her breath caught. I didn't keep the rest. She closed her eyes, the paper trembling in her hand. I don't know where you are, and I won't try to find you. This isn't a search. It's an admission. She sat down slowly, heart pounding. What we had changed me. What you gave up for me did too. I won't pretend it didn't. I won't pretend I'm whole without it. Tears blurred the ink. If freedom means never seeing me again, I'll accept it. But if you ever decide that survival isn't enough, that peace should be shared, I will be where I always was, waiting. No promises, no demands, just truth. She read the letter until the paper softened from the warmth of her hands. Then she folded it carefully and placed it somewhere safe, somewhere permanent. For days afterward, she carried the weight of it with her, the question it posed echoing through every quiet moment. Was she living, or simply no longer dying? Rocco returned to the Obsidian one evening long after it had stopped being his throne. The club had been renovated, stripped of its old excess, its underground ring sealed and repurposed. He stood alone near the bar, watching light reflect off polished glass, remembering spilled wine and the moment his life had cracked open. He didn't know if she would ever read the letter. He didn't know if she would come. But for the first time since she left, he allowed himself to hope, not desperately, not recklessly, but honestly. Some endings did not close doors. They left them ajar. And somewhere between the man he had been and the man he was becoming, Rocco Moretti waited not as a king guarding an empire, but as someone ready to be chosen. If she ever decided to return. The story was not finished. It was holding its breath. Rocco Moretti stopped waiting the day he realized waiting had become a habit rather than a choice. He still lived in New York, but not in the way he once had. The city no longer bent around him, no longer whispered his name with fear or awe. He had dismantled enough of his empire to make it unrecognizable, leaving behind something smaller, quieter, almost honest. Power no longer defined his days. Responsibility did. And in the space where ambition once ruled, something gentler had taken root. Some mornings, he walked without security. Some nights, he closed his office early. The Obsidian remained open. But it was no longer his throne. It was simply a place where memories lingered, where a glass of wine once spilled and changed the course of two lives. He never searched for her. That had been his promise, to let her freedom remain untouched by his reach. Keeping it was the hardest thing he had ever done. The cafe sat on a quiet street far from the noise of Manhattan's hunger. It was not the kind of place Rocco would have noticed before. He found it by accident, drawn in by the anonymity of it, by the way no one looked twice when he walked through the door. He ordered coffee he didn't need and sat near the window, watching people live lives that did not revolve around survival. That was when he saw her. She stood behind the counter, hair loosely tied back, glasses perched on her nose, sleeves rolled up as she wiped down the surface with practiced ease. For a moment, Rocco thought his mind was betraying him, offering comfort shaped like memory. But then she looked up. Their eyes met. Time did not stop. It softened. She did not freeze. She did not run. Her breath hitched just enough for him to see it, just enough for him to know this was real. She handed the cloth to someone behind her and stepped away from the counter, moving slowly, deliberately, as if giving herself permission with every step. Rocco stood, his movements unhurried, respectful of the fragile moment forming between them. They faced each other with only a small table separating them, the ordinary world pressing close, unaware of the history it contained. "You weren't supposed to find me," she said quietly. "I didn't," Rocco replied. "You chose a place where I could—" The corner of her mouth lifted, a familiar expression he had missed more than he allowed himself to admit. "You look different. So do you." She considered him for a moment, really looked at him, searching for the man he had been and the one he had become. "You kept your word," she said. "Yes," Rocco answered. "And you kept living." She nodded. It took time. They sat down together, not across from each other but side by side, the way people did when they no longer needed barriers. Silence settled, not awkward but full, carrying everything they didn't rush to say. "I read your letter," she admitted at last. Rocco's breath slowed. "I hoped you would. You didn't ask me to come back. I didn't want to trap you with expectation." Her fingers traced the edge of the table, grounding herself. "And if I hadn't, then I would have been grateful you were alive," he said simply. The honesty of it undid something in her. She turned toward him, eyes bright but steady. "I didn't come back because I missed danger," she said. "I came back because I missed being seen." Rocco looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a protector or a threat, not as a legend or a ghost, but as a woman who had chosen herself and still chosen him. "I don't need you to stay," he said. "I want you to." She exhaled, a sound halfway between laughter and release. "I don't know how to be the person I was with you and still keep the life I built." "Then don't," Rocco replied. "Be someone new. We can figure that out together." The word together lingered between them, soft and profound. They did not touch immediately. They finished their coffee. They spoke of small things: work, the weather, the strange comfort of anonymity. And when they finally stood to leave, she reached for his hand without hesitation, her grip warm and certain. Rocco did not pull her close. He did not claim her. He simply walked beside her, matching her pace, the city unfolding ahead of them like a place that might finally allow peace. That night, they stood at his window overlooking the city that had shaped and scarred them both. She leaned into him, her head resting against his shoulder, and for the first time, neither felt the need to guard the moment. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said softly. "I was never afraid of you," Rocco replied. "I was afraid of losing you." She smiled, closing her eyes. "You didn't. No vows were made, no promises sworn. They had learned that love built on survival did not need ceremony to endure. It needed choice, and patience, and the courage to stay." As the city lights flickered below, Rocco Moretti and the woman who had once disappeared into legend stood together, not as king and weapon, not as protector and shield, but as two people who had survived the worst of themselves and found something worth keeping on the other side. The world would never know her name, but Rocco did. And this time, he would not let her walk away alone.